Since we kind of have a natural lull in the room, I might make best use of that and start today's workshop. Thank you all so much for coming to Talking the Talkley, which is an opportunity to reflect on how, as linguists, we can engage various groups of people in information about linguistics that they may otherwise not really engage with. And I think it's worth kind of thinking about the role of the expert in today's cultural climate and what we can do to better facilitate thoughtful, evidence-based conversations about language and how it works and how people use it. For today, we have our panel of speakers up the front here. Everyone will be speaking for about 10 minutes. I'm going to do a very kind of informal, just some like discreet coughing behind you if you go too long, because hopefully we're going to move through, you'll get to see some of the things that people are doing in terms of linguistic communication and linguistics communication, and then we'll have at least hopefully half an hour for discussion that can then just move into further discussion on the way to tonight's opening talk for the conference. I will kind of get things started. There is a hashtag and a set of slides. So that's, you can pull up the slides if you want now or take them home and look at them later. If you're on your phone during this, it's like the opposite of a class or a lecture, please get your phone out. Please tweet, please Facebook, and kind of continue the conversation there. Our first speaker today is Daniel Midgley, who's come from UWA and will be talking about Talk the Talk. Thank you, Daniel.
Okay, the first thing that I want to say is I feel like we're just really lucky to be alive in this age, because public linguistics is something that is really exciting right now. It's a very hot topic. People are really interested in it. And so, we're lucky to occupy the space that we do, but also I want to share some ideas that you can have if you're not a public linguistic person, but you would like to do more of it. Some ideas where you can use the skills you already have to do more outreach and stuff. Here's a little bit about me. My name is Daniel Midgley. I do a show called Talk to Talk on RTR-FM 92.1 in Perth, Australia. It's a small community radio station, youth-oriented. It's really, really great to be able to work there, to do that there, because on Tuesdays I come in, play the show with my friends Ben and Kylie, and then take some questions by email and be able to answer them at the end of the show. The interesting thing about having a podcast that's strapped to a radio show is that you already have kind of a built-in audience. So that's very nice. And in fact, there is a bit of recognition that's happening this year, which in previous years hasn't been so. So I play the show and then I podcast it, so you get kind of the best of both worlds. I also do something called Because Language, which is just a podcast, not a radio show. It's long-form interviews. And then I'm also very fortunate this year to be able to do on ABC Radio Perth something called The Speakeasy. You just come in, do a segment, take some talkback questions, which is actually very challenging. And the audience for the youth-oriented station RTR is very different from the ABC, which is a lot older, a lot more conservative, and I fight people more. So that's interesting. Oh, they're hungry for validation on their terrible grammar. I'm serious. You wouldn't believe it. Now, people are fascinated by language because, of course, language is very interesting. I've never seen this much interest in public linguistics. However, a lot of people are interested in stupid things that are boring. Like, how many languages do you speak? Seriously, that was a question the first week I was on. What do you think about two spaces versus one at the end of a sentence when you type? And a lot of things that aren't, you guys, these are interesting questions, but they're not the most interesting thing about linguistics. I can show you the world. There's so much more out there. Let's do this. And also, on the ABC, I have to tamp down a lot more language policing than I do. So there's that. The flip side of this is that people are terrified by language. One thing that people say is, are you Daniel on that show about language? I'm like, yeah. And they're like, oh man, I love your show. Oh, now I feel insecure about talking to you. There's a lot of linguistic insecurity out there. People feeling bad about the way that they talk. And so there's a lot of affirmation that I can do. I think people have bad memories of language and grammar instruction when it was done poorly. And there's a lot of linguistic insecurity. let's talk about what happens when the media goes wrong. And there are many points at which this can fail. The first point in the chain that I want to talk about is researchers or lecturers. We are good at what we do, but we are very busy. We're encouraged to do outreach, encouraged, not in any tangible way. It's just that they like it when we do it, right? Is there anybody who's heard this before? Oh, we want you to do more outreach? Sure. Have you got any support in outreach? Silence. Okay. And we don't always connect with the public. In fact, in preparing for this, I got to speak to a lecturer who said, yeah, I did some talkback radio, and it was just the worst experience I've ever had. Because if you're inexperienced, it can be very daunting and intimidating, and it cannot be maybe a good experience. So that's one point. Also, second actor, uni PR offices. They're there to promote us, they're there to promote our work, but they also like things to be very sexy. So they also don't know very much about what we do, especially in linguistics, where everybody thinks they know linguistics because everybody speaks a language, right? They think they know what we do, but they don't. Okay, the next point. Journalists. They are smart people, very often, but they don't always know who's worth listening to, which is why we get, every once in a while, like this drunk Aussie accent story, right? Who noticed that one? Okay, and then it comes up like every couple of years, and then we keep having to beat it back. It's like an underground. And then there's the public. Also smart people, but they don't do linguistics all day. At least that's how I like to envision them. And then there's also the ones of the public who are full of attitudes, they're trollish and opinionated, and they sometimes cause a bit of trouble when you're doing talkback, and you have to handle them diplomatically. Something could go wrong at every stage in this chain, and this is what I call the Scylla and Charybdis of sexy science. If it's not sexy enough, then nobody will listen to it. But if it's way too sexy, then that means it's usually wrong, and there are false sort of conclusions being drawn. So you're always sort of constantly sort of sexing it up and then beating it back and trying to stay right in the middle there. Let me take a look at one time this year when something went wrong. This was a paper by Damien Blasi, Morten Christiansen, and a team. It's called Sound Meaning Association Biases Evidenced Across Thousands of Languages. You might remember this story. This was the one where they looked at data from loads of languages, and they found that there were, as opposed to language being totally arbitrary, they found that there were certain regularities that kept coming up. Words for round things across languages seem to have a rhotic in them, an R. Words for nose always seem to have a nasal. What a surprise, right? I mean, it's a nose. Come on. What did you think was going to come out of that thing? But in the abstract of the paper, it says this: these striking similarities call for a re-examination of the fundamental assumption of the arbitrariness of the sign. Now, I don't know what is in your lecture slides, but in my introductory lecture slides, I do have a bit on arbitrariness. But I also have a thing where I say, hey, here are some things where maybe it's not so arbitrary, and let's talk about those for a while. So this isn't exactly unknown, right? But there it is. By the time it got to the PR department of the university, it said, in a study that shatters a cornerstone concept in linguistics, an analysis of nearly 2/3 of the world's languages shows that humans tend to use the same sounds for common objects and ideas no matter what language they're speaking. Okay, so getting less helpful. By the time it got to the media, it looked like this. Humans may speak a universal language. Okay. And I actually got to do an interview with Damien Blasi on Talk the Talk earlier this year, and the sense that I got was that they were sort of watching in horror as this whole thing spiraled out of control, because, once again, journalists are smart people, but they don't know what we do, and everybody thinks they know language, but they might not. Secretly, I think that the original abstract wasn't helpful. Okay, enough of that though. That's a case where things go wrong. So what do we do, and what maybe can you do? There are some things that you can do if you're somebody who isn't doing a lot of outreach, but you'd like to do more. And some of these you're probably already doing. Be a good language explainer. What does that mean? It means you kind of have to think about how things look to other people. That's one thing that smart people are good at doing. It just takes a little bit of practice. Being available to media. There are lists you can get on. You might get phone calls every once in a while. Hey, we have a news hole that we want to fill. We just need you. We don't need you to be right or anything. We just need you to be interesting and fill up at the appropriate time, right? So could you do that? They really do need stories, and if you can manage to be successful at this, and if you find you like it, it's something you can do. If it's something you don't like and you have a bad experience, maybe it's something you might want to shy away from, or maybe you might want to get better at it. I wish that everyone, when they published a paper, would publish a public version, a version that's intended for the public, and along with the regular ones. So, what does this mean for you? What does it mean if words across different languages have the same sounds? What does it mean that creoles are different? How can you use this in your life? Now, I have said that people think they know language, but they kind of don't. I want to show the flip side of this too, and that is that people think they don't know about language, but actually they know a lot about language. And I haven't found a better way of approaching it than this. This was a tweet that just came out of nowhere. It's from a book. I forget who wrote this. It says, adjectives in English absolutely have to be in this order: opinion, size, age, shape, color, origin, material, purpose, noun. So you can have a lovely little old rectangular green French silver whittling knife. But if you mess with that word order in the slightest, you'll sound like a maniac. It's an odd thing that every speaker uses that list, but almost none of us could write it out. And as size comes before color, green great dragons can't exist. So we did a show called Red Big Balloon, where I got my friends Ben and Kylie just sort of put adjectives in what they felt was the right order, and lo and behold, they matched up, right? Wow, this is amazing. Look at all this stuff that's in your brain already. How did you know that? How did it get there? Isn't language amazing? And this, I think, is a good way to do it, because then it helps people to unlock what's already in their head. Okay, and I gotta stop. We also need to challenge language ideologies, and there's a lot of classism and a lot of racism that's dressed up in concern about language. And that needs to stop. So it's not all intuitive. We need to bring the enthusiasm that we feel for language. We need to remind us what got us in the game in the first place. We also need to respect the listeners. We can break it down without dumbing it down. That's about it for me. So I will move on.
Use that, and I'm going to do a very meandering introduction so that Rosie has a chance to just flip the slides over here. Give you a good chance to take out your phone, send a tweet, put something on Facebook. That's a kind of practical activity for you to participate in today. Katie Jepson and Rosie Billington are here representing the Linguistics Roadshow, and they're going to share some of their experiences.
Thank you. You can stay here.
No, you've got to get in the video camera.
Oh, no, we can't see our slides. No, stand over there. We'll stand here. All right.
I'll scoot over. No, I won't.
So, indeed, we're talking about the Linguistics Roadshow today, which is a CODAL-funded outreach project. We specifically sought funding for outreach in this case because the opportunity arose, which it doesn't always. It's a workshop aimed at high school students. It's about 2 hours long, and this is our kind of little one-sentence BAM. What is it? An interactive showcase of the science of language, presenting the big questions and little-known facts about language for a general audience, and by that we do mean Year 7 to Year 10 students. So, in creating the roadshow, we had three main motivations. Our first was to increase the public understanding of linguistics and language use in Australia, trying to take into consideration what people do know and what people don't know, and negative feelings, as we were just saying, about ageism or racism, and so on. We wanted to raise the profile of linguistics because, as linguists, we think it's an interesting area of research, and if we could inspire that in some students, that would make us happy. We wanted to make it in general more discoverable for students who might not have access, and present the actual linguistic research as something that can be quite interesting and relevant to their everyday lives, even if the pursuit doesn't interest them. We specifically wanted to target students who are not able to easily get to universities to find out about it themselves. And so far we've been on 2 trips, with a third in the works. We've been to part of northwestern Victoria and to Broome.
So, why did we pick students, and specifically the years 7 to 10? And one of the things to mention is that we specifically wanted to target students in their school environment. We didn't want to try and set up something where the schools had to organise them coming in or anything. We wanted to go there, do a self-contained thing. The teachers don't have to think about anything. But why we picked the students? Well, we thought firstly that they might be a bit more accepting of new or different ideas. You know, other people are kind of sometimes quite fixed in their views on how language works, and it can be quite hard to shift that or bring something new to the discussion. But we thought students are really well placed to do that. They're there learning every day. We can add something into the mix. And they might be also well placed to share any interesting or useful information they learn with other people in their networks, families, friends. If something really catches their interest, this can often spread far beyond that individual student. And we also thought that students might particularly benefit from positive messages about, especially variation in language use. You know, often in school they're getting a lot of sort of negative feedback. You can't spell like that, you can't say that, don't do this, don't do that. We wanted to kind of be a little bit of a sort of a different force, saying, you know, actually there's a lot of interesting stuff going on, and a lot of it's okay, and, you know, look at all this amazing variation. And of course, as Katie said, we hope that perhaps we might also spark an interest in pursuing linguistics or a language-related career. That was very much a sort of secondary goal. It was just more like, what can we offer them that's interesting, useful, relevant? And then we also had the secondary audience, which was the teachers. And we sort of left it up to the teachers how much they may or may not want to get involved. As we said, we wanted it to be just a self-contained thing where we just land in the school, do our thing for 2 hours, and then leave, and they don't have to stress about anything. But we figured they'd probably at least be listening in, maybe getting involved to some extent, and that the workshop content and perhaps the style might then indirectly inform their views, not just on what linguistics is, but what linguists do and who they are, and you know, how they might interact. We also wanted to keep it in mind that we really needed to show the educational value of the workshop, because linguistics doesn't already have a very strong presence in the curricula in Australian schools. So we wanted to show, look, you know, there are various ways that this connects with stuff that you're already doing in the classroom, stuff that kids are already doing, so that maybe they'll invite us back, or maybe they'll be more kind of feel more positive about welcoming other linguists into the school or linguistics into a curriculum. And of course, teachers might also be in a position to reinforce things that come up in the workshops and distribute further information. We had booklets and online materials and all sorts of things that they might then be able to draw on for other things.
So we had a few key messages that we wanted to get across, because we couldn't run a whole degree's worth of information in a 2-hour session. We decided that if there was one thing that the students got from the workshop, is that there's so much diversity at all these different levels, and it's all really great. And we kind of broke that down into 3 key messages. The first one, that there's a huge amount of linguistic diversity at the global level. Pretty simple, you can get that with some whiz-bang numbers, cool maths. The second is to kind of dive into the Australian linguistic landscape, of course talk about Indigenous traditional languages and Creoles and migrant languages, of course including English, and variation within Australian English, which of course the students would be able to reflect on their own language, their own Australian English in this way. And it's at this point when we were also able to highlight what we as linguists might do and actually use data and say, if you're interested, if you have a question, you can usually figure it out by looking at data. There's ways you can answer your questions.
So that's sort of what kind of guided the development of the content, which is fine, you know, okay, that's all the stuff we want to include. How are we going to deliver that to the students? Is it just going to be a wall of information for 2 hours, or how can we do that most effectively? So a few kind of guiding principles. We spent a really long time planning this stuff before we actually implemented it, so we sort of thought really carefully about all of this. One is that we thought it would be more interesting, of course, for our audience if we had a sort of really dynamic delivery, high energy, not too much technical terminology. In fact, there's pretty much none in the whole workshop. Not too long, so 2 hours was a really good time frame. Not taking ourselves too seriously, as this photo shows. So we had the workshop session is broken into a sort of a 20-minute talk, and then 3 series of activities, and then a little bit more talking at the end. And we have 4 presenters doing that talk together, kind of a minute and a half at a time, switching in and out, and really keeping it very lively and very lighthearted. We also wanted to, as much as possible, relate all of the content in the workshop to students' everyday experience with language, because they are experts, as Daniel also said, in many ways. People have a lot of knowledge already. They sometimes just don't realise they have that knowledge. And it's also really nice for the students to realise that in many ways they're experts on stuff that their teachers have no idea about. You know, certain conventions of how you might use punctuation in text messaging or something like that. They're really switched on about, and they have a lot to offer in a discussion. We also wanted to pick topics that would generate a lot of discussion and invite differing opinions and insights. So some of you have probably seen the maps, the mapping activity that was developed with Lauren as one of the roadshow activities, and then kind of grew legs and got a lot more attention amongst the wider public, because it was a sort of online survey and mapping thing. And this worked fantastically in the classroom. The students absolutely love it, and they love being able to argue about what word they use and why it might be different, and bring all of their thoughts to that. So it was very, very successful activity. And that activity was one of several. We've done a few different ones rotating throughout the times we've run the roadshow, because we thought it was really important to have accessible activities that give students a really hands-on opportunity to learn something about how languages work. It's all very well and good to say, yeah, look, in Australian Indigenous languages you might have these kind of noun classification systems where you use these bits and you put them with these kinds of words, but if they actually have a puzzle and they need to work that out themselves, then they really get it and they feel so pleased with themselves when they work it out. And they're going to remember that. And as we mentioned earlier, we wanted to show that the content, kind of everything within linguistics touches on so many other disciplines. It's not just this esoteric thing hanging out there on its own. It really relates to lots of other things that are already being covered in schools, or that students are maybe already developing an interest in. And we had lots of fun souvenirs, which, yes, they were fun, but they also had a sort of ulterior motive here. They were stuff that would hang around the house that the students would then maybe pick up or show their parents or remind them of something that they learned. And so there was a show bag that had all sorts of bits and pieces in there that would hopefully maybe cement some of the knowledge or jog their memory or give someone something else to learn about. And we wanted to also really give the human side of things. Who are we, the people who are presenting the roadshow? What do we do in our day jobs? What sort of work could linguistics involve? And kind of cover a whole lot of different things there just at the end as a nice kind of way of wrapping up.
As we're trying to talk about our audience here, we tried to get to know our audience better and also engage the students in the talks that were to come by running a little quiz at the very, very beginning. Basically, we stood up at the front and said, hello, this is who we are, and we put on a daggy tune, and then they all did the quiz. It helped to raise some of the questions that would be answering later, and they could say, oh, I didn't get that, oh, I didn't know that. And it would enable us to then maybe beef up some parts of the talks to reflect what they do and don't know. So, some of the questions we asked were, is the world gaining or losing languages? Is English getting worse over time? How many Indigenous languages were spoken in Australia at the time of European colonisation? And indeed, question number 9 is troubling that almost 70% of students say yes, getting worse over time. What this means, well...
This is about 300 students so far.
Yeah.
So, just sort of to wrap up, our view is that there's really enormous scope for doing outreach, linguistics outreach work in schools, with the students, with their teachers, with young people more generally. And so we really made some very careful and strategic decisions about who we wanted to reach here. So we were really thinking about the audience in developing this. And then have tried to get to know them more, as Kate was saying, also talking with the teachers and other teacher friends that we have in the sort of early planning stages of this. Talking with the students themselves during the workshop and trying to gauge what they found really exciting or interesting or were possibly bored by, and looking at the results from this quiz. And we found that it really helped us. Every time we sort of started to get carried away with our big plans, we could tell them about this and we could show them this stuff about untranslatable words and try and explain why they're not really untranslatable and go into all this detail. We sort of kept coming back to, okay, hang on, what was our point in developing this? What were our motivations? And what were the 3 things that we wanted them to get out of it? Because we figured, if nothing else, if they get something that aligns with those 3 messages that are about diversity at the global level, at the sort of Australian level, and then with the sort of within the individual or within sort of small speech communities, then that would be a success. So that was kind of our measure of success. If they could take away something like that, we were happy with how it went. So that helps to really stay focused and realistic about what we could get done within a 2-hour workshop when we don't know the students beforehand. And so the aim is, of course, to make the messages as engaging and accessible as possible for this very targeted audience. So far we've met with, as I said, there's about 300 students so far, and then we've had some other kind of community visits as part of the roadshow visits, like talking at a community library, visiting a language centre and things like that. And our view is that it's not all about numbers, so we really want to kind of focus, and we think that this is a nice way of complementing the other kind of more wide-ranging work that other people are doing when it comes to outreach, and by really keeping in mind who it is that we're trying to work with here and offer something useful to. So, and yes, and I've already said that, so I think that is it. Thank you.
It is my great pleasure to introduce next speaker, Brighde Collins, who runs the research unit for Indigenous languages in an administrative capacity. So she's the one who makes it run. That's generally what happens when you're an administrator. And as part of that role, she runs the Rule Twitter account that she's going to show us now, and that if you're not following by the end of this talk, I will be very disappointed. So thank you very much, Brighde.
So I am the project officer for the research unit for Indigenous language. We've got about 18 researchers working on languages in Australia and also in the Pacific region, and then a bunch of PhD students underneath that as well, doing research in the same area. And my role is, a number of different things, but I'll talk about my project, which is basically producing images like these. So it's a pretty image. It has the word for that image in 4 different languages. The language is named underneath the word, and then I've got a link to the sources, or not a link, I've got the sources acknowledged underneath, and then a link to the map, the Gawne map produced by First Languages Australia, where you can see where that language is spoken in Australia. And I'm focusing just on the Twitter feed. We actually put these on Instagram and Facebook as well, but they are much less popular than Twitter. So Twitter has become incredibly popular over a short amount of time. So basically, I started out, how do we get more followers on Twitter? We started with 300 people who were following us when I started this project in May 2016, and an average of 8 engagements per tweet, which is really quite low. And we wanted more, and someone just said, oh, a picture tells 1,000 words, and I thought, yeah, well, that's it. That's what we have to do. So they're beautiful, and putting beautiful things in the public sphere is nice, but why? Why do that? Basically, the idea behind it was to get the general public's attention with pretty images. We're increasing our presence on their I'm so good at Twitter, I can't remember their feed, thank you. Yeah, so by increasing the pretty pictures, they start following us, and then everything else that we put, we will also be going onto their feed as well. And by doing this, we want to increase general knowledge of the work that our researchers do. We want to increase general knowledge about the work on Indigenous languages in Australia, and also kind of increase awareness of linguistic diversity in Australia. So a very quite general level there. How did we go? So if you look here, this is the average number of likes per month, per tweet. Starting in October 2014, 18 months before I started doing the posts, and then that arrow line in the middle is when I started doing the tweets. And you can see in the 20 months after I started doing it, there's been a huge increase in likes across that. You can see here, this is the highest, so I'm looking at November here, which was much higher. And this is the post that got the highest number of likes so far. It was on November the 15th, and it was quite a politically relevant time. So it could have been that I really well synchronised the image that I chose with the situation. But you know, that's a really good strategic. I didn't just randomly choose a rainbow for that day, and it strategically worked well for us. Yes, and so here you can see we had 185 likes. That's the overall number of likes from people liking retweets. But we had around 45 likes directly on our page. A key thing there is the engagements. So that's not just likes, but also clicks through onto the image, clicks through onto our Twitter page itself, profile follows after that, which it resulted in one. But yeah, so if we look at the engagements per tweet, so a much broader kind of interaction with the tweets. Again, the same pattern follows. In the 18 months preceding that, we had less than 20 kind of engagements. after that, we're going up to 180, nearly 180 in the 20 months after that. So a really large increase. Here's a fun one, and I should say, I don't know where I'll say it now. So I also, as well as the pretty image and the words, I tried to kind of make it a little bit silly, a little bit jokey, something that will make people go, oh, what a dork, calling it a birdie. Because I kind of feel like that will be more personable, and it seems to have really worked. People are like, oh, this is just someone chatting to me, saying something fun. And so I think a lot of people might feel more comfortable following something that says that. So here you can see we've got a lot of engagements. The thing that I really wanted to do when I started this, though, was not to get people looking at our pictures. I wanted them to look at the stuff we were producing alongside the pictures. And this is the graph of the average engagements per non-image tweet. So all of those, if I take out all of the ones that were for those posts, tweets about images, these are what's left. And the trend is still kind of there. But it's not as striking, I guess. The first 18 months, most kind of engagements were below 10. There was an average of 8, as I said before. Afterward, it goes up to, around 20 to 25 per. But you see, I spend more time on creating the word posts and therefore don't tweet as much about other things. So there's 0 for some months. And also when you tweet a lot on certain months, so for NAIDOC week, the theme was Our Languages Matter. I was tweeting 2 or 3 tweets a day. Therefore, more tweets, there's a lower average of engagements per tweet. So it's not, and these, I did I? Can everyone see?
It's better.
Okay. So these are 2 examples of tweets that people were engaging with from the NAIDOC week kind of thing. So there's no image directly, but there are links to outside kind of things that are going on. What about for you? So I imagine that some people are wanting in this audience to think about how to strategically promote what you're doing in the Twitter sphere. And so I think that including images within your output is potentially it's a really great way to engage people with what you're doing. You don't have to necessarily have a direct relevance to what you're doing. If you choose a theme and you start tweeting about things and just add photos of clouds or have an image that grabs someone's eye as they're scrolling through, I think it's much more likely to grab their attention. And it will mean that you're in their kind of radar. And also being followed and retweeted by someone who has a high number of followers is obviously a huge boon. For us, we were really early on supported by someone who is called Parrot of the Day. He posts a picture of a parrot every single day. He's incredibly popular and he retweets us all the time. And so, early on we were like, all right, I'm just going to have to include more birds. So, and we did. And so it's really worked for us. So if you can tell what you're doing a little bit with your images, then you can follow certain groups of people and share the word. That's all.
Brighde being the classic 142 speakers and pulling us back into time. Thanks for that. Very Twitter-friendly, short, punchy talk. We now have Greg Dixon, who is a man who wears many hats in the linguistics communication arena and has worn many hats over the years. I'm very pleased that he's here today to talk about the Northern Territory Facebook page that he runs as another platform that is a potentially powerful way to communicate linguistics to the public. Thank you, Greg.
Thank you. Not the Northern Territory Facebook
What did I say, the Northern?
Just Northern Territory in general.
Sorry, the bilingual education. Sorry.
Eventually.
Eventually.
It's in the plan. I've done a bunch of stuff, and Facebook is one of them. So Facebook is only one way in which I merge narcissism with linguistic passion. I think, I don't know if this is just my opinion, but like for all of us guys who enjoy doing this, must be a degree of narcissism. So I do lots of stuff, like tweeting, both kind of as a pseudo-Creole speaker myself, and also for the Language Centre, blogging, written for the conversation and face-to-face stuff, training or public talks. So I mean, these guys are covering most of this stuff. You've got the best linguistics blogger in Australia at the end here. You've got a podcaster, face-to-face person, Twitterer, ABC expert. But Facebook is the bit that I thought I'd talk about. So I'll talk about Facebook, but across all these things, there's kind of a shared goal. The purpose of the strategy, I guess, in what we do is to have a goal in what you're trying to achieve, think about your audience carefully, have a strategy, and just give it a go. And I think that the last one is probably the one that most people get unstuck on. That this isn't rocket science or anything that hard, it's just give it a crack and learn by doing. So that's what I did with this page. I am curious though, has anyone actually got experience administering a Facebook page here? Yes? Has anyone thought about it and then gone, I don't know? Okay. So I did this a few years ago with the Bilingual Education Northern Territory Facebook page. It's kind of weird because this is completely unaffiliated, unattached, anonymous. There's no organisation behind this. It's just me going, I'm going to talk about bilingual education on Facebook. And there's no obvious beneficiaries. Who is this for? Why I did this is because working in the Northern Territory Indigenous languages, just becoming really aware of what a struggle it is for bilingual programs to be supported and maintained. So I was working for an institute up there in 2008 when they basically tried to really limit the potential for bilingual education to exist with the first 4 hours, compulsory first 4 hours in English policy, which was awful. It's been attacked like this a few times over the decades. So even though we know bilingual education is great for Indigenous languages, it's great for remote communities, it's great for employment and economic development, lots of reasons, it's susceptible to attack. What I saw as an issue with those attacks is it has quite a narrow support base. There's some really great educators working in the NT that have a lot of experience with this, but they're busy. They're also public servants, so they're kind of bound with what they can say and do. So sort of having a broad base of support for bilingual education, I thought would help. And so just get on Facebook and tell people why it's a cool thing to do. So that's what I did, and it's fun, and it's been pretty successful. And because it's not attached to anything, no one cares if I do it or not. I just do it because it's fun. And but you still have to have a strategy. So thinking of who the primary audience is, I really just wanted ordinary Territorians was the people that I had in mind. People who are a bit socially aware, people who have kids going to school or work in schools. So that's kind of the primary audience that I think of. But you always have other people that will be attracted to what you're doing. So there's other people around Australia that are interested in this. There's linguists who are interested in this, students of linguistics, other people, Indigenous people in the NT and outside the NT, because there's a rights issue behind this issue. And then the hope for everybody is that policymakers and media are also having a look. And if they see someone posting something and they see it's getting a response from the public, it makes media and policy makers take notice. And the best example of this is when the old NT Senator, Federal Senator Trish Crossan, gave a talk about bilingual education in the Senate one day. I read what she said and I was like, oh my gosh, she's copied all that off the description of my Facebook page. So total plagiarism, but I was quite happy with that. And then, I don't know, it's hard to know how to do this well. I just sort of think, look, if you can write well, if you're in this business, they call it copy. If you do good copy, then it's really going to help. Think about your audience. When you go onto Facebook, if you're a Facebook user, you know what you like to see when you're on Facebook. So just think, if you're a follower of my page, what sort of things are you going to want to see when you log on to Facebook. You don't want to be bombarded with the same thing all the time. You want something that's either going to brighten your day, give you a little bit of self-righteous, I don't know, social, I care about this issue thing, all those little things that you think your audience might want to see. And so within these parameters though, my approach is to really try and mix it up. So I'll do posts that refer to different languages of the Northern Territory, or even go international. I'll do some posts that are really short, or some that have a lot of explanation, some posts that are actually kind of just educational and really trying to inform people about something, and some that are much lighter, and different frequencies. I might be busy and I don't post for 3 weeks, or there might be something going on that week and I'll do a few posts in a week. I really don't have any hard and fast rules. No one cares if I'm doing this or not anyway, as I said. But, I like mixing it up because it means the audience isn't getting bored or finding it all too samey. So anyway, feel free to have a look and follow if you like. Just some examples. So this is what I would call a bread and butter post, which is when something comes up in the media that's specifically about bilingual education, specifically about a language that's got Indigenous people being advocates for bilingual education. This is the stuff that if I see it come up in the media anywhere, I'm like, great, I'm sharing that totally. And it always gets a good response because all my followers are really, they think this is an important issue. So this was just a post, and you can see, so the page at the moment has just over 1,800 people liking or following it. So my little measure is if it goes beyond that 1,800, that means it's being shared, it's found a larger audience. That's just my little measure that I like to see if it actually reaches more than who actually likes the page. So this post did well. That sort of bread and butter thing, that's just me keeping an eye on what stories pop up in the media or what my friends are sharing, and then I'll put it on that page. This is more of a mix-it-up post where I just saw this on Twitter once, so I screenshotted it. So the tweet was just, it says, this ignorant type person saying, it's rude not speaking English in public places, and then the response, does it remind you that you can only speak one language? Lol. So, just a nice little tweet that I screenshotted and put up there with cheeky and a monkey face. And, people, that's easy. But yeah, it just mixes it up so they're not getting bombarded with the same, you need to care about bilingual education in Northern Territory type thing. And the other thing, we sort of get these do's and don'ts, and some people think that just having a text-only post is too boring. But sometimes if I do, then they get a reasonable response. So this is just, there was a symposium, and I saw someone quote this on Twitter, Yalna Yunupingu, saying, I consider Yolngu children to be as clever as anyone else. I don't want their cleverness left outside the classroom door. It's just a lovely quote. So I saw that, put that up there, gets a good response. So that was cool. So, and some people might say, text only, no one's going to want to read that, but people do. If it's good content, it works. And then, so all these little strategies, sometimes I get a chance to, sort of bring it home. I'm not selling anything. I'm not really I want people to care about this issue, but there's nothing that I'm really driving people to do. But if I come across, things like this, which is a remote school who's looking for a teacher and they've got a great bilingual program and a great sort of philosophy behind their school, and they want a teacher, and I can amplify that call for staff. This is fantastic. So this was only last week. And I put I just screenshotted their flyer and put all the text there with all their details. Because it's an image, people are likely to share it more. And that got a really great response, so that got shared quite a lot. And maybe one or two of those people that see that are going to think about applying, but there's 4,000 people that have seen that, and they've seen a remote school being active about the use of Indigenous language in a remote school, and so that's a goal in itself reached. So that's pretty fun. So you can do this sort of thing about anything that you might be a bit passionate about in linguistics, whether it's, there's a certain type of verb, or there's a verb you like in Australian English, and you just want to celebrate that verb. My favourite verb in Australian English is bags. I had bags. If I wrote a Facebook page about an Australian English verb, it would be bags. And I just find examples of it and make people love bags. You can do it for anything. Anything you get excited about, give it a crack. if you are making a Facebook page, be ready for Facebook to try and get your money. They'll always be like, boost your post and buy more likes and blah, 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 blah. I ignore all of it. I figure if I'm making it interesting and doing good copy and I have a following, people are going to like it and respond to it anyway. So I avoid that. It might work, I just don't go there. So I think if there's a reason for people to like what you're doing, they will see it. And Facebook has all these algorithms. So Facebook now, years ago, was different. If you post a YouTube video, it disappears really quickly because YouTube is run by Google and Facebook competes with Google. If you post anything directly from Twitter, it disappears really quickly. I even wonder if that screenshot I did of Twitter, Facebook knows that you're showing something on Twitter and just try and bury it away. So you have to know these little things where you sort of get a hunch of what Facebook's trying to do with these things. The other thing is that likes aren't everything, so some people just get excited about the fact that you've got 1,811 likes and that means my page is doing really well. But you might have that many, but your posts kind of flop and you might get 1 or 2 likes. So this is only just one little thing, and it's nice to keep in mind the other impacts that your posts might make. So occasionally I get a message from a student who's doing a high school assignment. Can you tell me what schools teach bilingual education in Northern Territory? And I'm like, great, someone cares. And or just how many people share it, maybe people you can see that there's an interesting article in the conversation that you've shared. You can see that people are reading it, but maybe they're not commenting, maybe they're not liking it. But you know that people are clicking through because you get that sort of information. And so that's enough to know that, you're doing something that might be useful. So don't be too worried about all these don'ts. Just, like I said, if you want to do this sort of stuff, give it a crack. This takes me, I don't know, I might spend 10 minutes a week on it. Probably usually on the train on the way home or something. So it's pretty easy. And it's fun. Anyway, that's what I do. So if you feel like applying what you do to Facebook, that might help.
Hi, I'm Lauren. I've been introducing everyone else, so I'll just continue and introduce myself. Greg mentioned that a lot of the time I'm motivated by just a little bit of narcissism. And I think we're also motivated by a little bit of megalomania, and that is certainly what has prompted me to bring all these amazing people together for this workshop, is that I want to see more linguistics out there. So in my own kind of capacity as someone who cares a lot about engagement with people about linguistics and explain to people how language works and why linguistics is cool. I've been writing Superlinguo for the last 7 years. That was a collaborative project, and then I took it on. And for the last year, Gretchen McCulloch and I have been running Enthusiasm, which is a podcast that is enthusiastic about linguistics. And those two projects are in many ways a really nice balance with my academic life. And I really love doing really detailed, specific research on interactional uses of evidentiality in various Tibetic languages. But for me, it's also an opportunity to share my general passion for linguistics and sometimes my passion for particular evidentials in Tibeto-Burman languages that allows me to kind of feel motivated and refreshed moving back and forth between the two. And hopefully today these talks have given you some really great ideas about how you can connect with people and why it might be rewarding to do so. But I'm also aware that we are all humans and we're all motivated by really selfish, what's in it for me kind of motivations. And so I wanted to bring to this conversation a little bit of that kind of realistic what's in it for me discussion, because it is really great if you have the time or the energy to run a Facebook page. It's really great if you invest the time in joining a blog or building up a Twitter following with some people around a topic. But these are actually skills that can help you with your academic work as well. And so for me, the pop linguistic stuff helps me feel excited still about the work that I do, but the pop linguistics, the linguistics communication stuff that I do also gives me skills that reinform my academic work. And so I just wanted to focus very briefly on two of those things. The first thing is that writing linguistic communication or working in a general public kind of sphere is really exciting in terms of publishing deadlines and gives you a kind of different take on these things. So this is, it's a lovely paper, and it's just an example that I noticed because I was waiting a very long time for it to have a publishing date. But this is a paper that was accepted at the end of 2014 and didn't come out until 2017. And this is not an atypical story in linguistics or in any academic publishing. And so it was available as a preprint for a long time, but you get this very long lag between when you write an academic paper or when you prepare for a conference and then when you actually get to deliver that content. And that can sometimes feel a bit frustrating. I don't know what's happening here. It can sometimes feel a bit frustrating. You can sometimes feel like you're spinning your wheels. But it can also mean that we fall into the kind of slow burn trap. And we think, well, you know, if a paper is going to take 6 months to get reviewed, I'm probably not going to take less than 6 months to get around to writing it in the first place. Whereas when you write for a general audience, you're much more liberated from that kind of academic glacial timeline. I mean, because you're generally not presenting primary research, you're presenting kind of summary information. And so another thing that I do regularly is I write a short column at the back of the big issue. If you ever do the crossword, you may see that there. And so every 2 weeks, I have to come up with another little thing and I have to finish it. And compared to the academic paper I've been working on for 6 months, saying I have finished a discrete thing and delivered it and it's in print is kind of a nice change of pace from academia. And not only are you able to publish things faster, it helps you become quicker at writing. So writing a blog for many years has taught me to get a very quick version down fast. It's taught me to kind of not worry about editing until something's there. And that's definitely informed my academic writing. I feel much better about facing a blank page because I have to do it every 2 weeks for the big issue, and so starting an academic article suddenly becomes a lot less daunting. The other thing that it can provide you with in terms of skills, if you hone your linguistic communication skills, is when it comes time to write genres that you may not experience all the time, but suddenly have to become very, very good at. And so this is one that is obviously kind of weighing on my mind at the moment, is the DECRA landscape for the Australian Research Council. And in these proposals, which are very long, extensive things, but what people often trip up on are these very short, pithy statements that need to be written, and they need to be written for an intelligent, non-linguist audience. And we've definitely heard some people on the panel here today mention that they have experience pitching to that level of audience. And so these are just two parts of that DECRA application that require you to think about your academic topic in a way that's very different from how you may have written about it up until this point in your career. So between learning to write faster and learning to write technically complex information in a non-technical way, they're two really great things that you can gain as benefits from communicating linguistics to a wider audience. So thank you. I am just going to slide straight into, in the interest of making up time, the next talk. I'm very pleased that Tiger Webb could come down here today. Tiger has many jobs at the ABC, but one of them, I think the one you'll be talking about today, is working as the ABC language. What is your official title?
Researcher.
Researcher. So he is ABC's language researcher. If we manage to get through to question time, we can all ask him about what it was like to call up and find out about how to pronounce the Prime Minister of New Zealand's name, but I'll leave him to talk about some of his work and communicating linguistics kind of from another sphere. So thank you, Tiger.
My good news, my talk will not be very long. I'm mostly here, I think, to sort of hear, I hope, from all of you. I know, as Daniel said, the media is not always the best at communicating linguistics or any aspect of science, and so I'm happy to be asked any questions today. Or if you don't get to me, I'm on Twitter. You can also just email language@abc.net.au if you have any questions about, particularly the ABC, but general sort of media, and I've been working in digital and social strategy for a while as well. So I guess the thing that I do at the ABC is really twofold. I look after two similarly named but quite distinct little bits. The thing you see in front of you, this is ABC Pronounced. Has anyone seen this before? Anyone? 2, 3 hands, 4, 5, fantastic. That may be proportionally a greater number than within the ABC, but this is a pronunciation database that I've inherited. It used to be called the SCOES database, which was an acronym. It stood for the Standing Committee on Spoken English. That was deemed too magisterial, and so we changed it to the friendly ABC Pronounced. It's about my age. I inherited it. It's been going since the 50s. It's about 40,000 headwords strong. And as you can read from the body copy, it's basically for broadcasters, but also for everyone. It's publicly accessible to find it very general and very, as you'll see, not super robust pronunciations of place names and people names across the world. Like me, the pronunciation key doesn't deal particularly well with stress. And a bunch of other things as well, but it's there and it's pretty good. The other thing I look after, and perhaps something that I'm now a bit known for, weirdly, is this thing called, every month we have these meetings for ABC Language, which is an in-house usage body that looks at the way broadcasters around, not just the ABC, but commercial as well, talk about things or write about things, also what complaints we receive from the greater Australian public, areas we might fall down in coverage, terminology, a whole range of things. And so I compile reports every month, and we go to a meeting and we argue about it. Is there a difference between saying flat or unit or apartment? Does one connote a socioeconomic status, the other may not? That's a real discussion we had. Suzanne Rowe from Triple J was there. I don't imagine she got much out of it. But, so those are my two sort of hats that I do. I think there's a thing I want to say, which is that often when you're thinking about outreach, when you're thinking about media, people say go do it, go get some outreach, and people tend to actually not remember that audio or radio exists. I think because it is quite invisible and ephemeral. But there are about, I think, 1,300, 1,400 radio transmitters in Australia. The ABC has over 60 radio stations. Some are national, some are local. The point I'm trying to make here is that it has many outlets. There are just so many places to go. There aren't many print publications, still remaining, and so radio is robust and it endures. And there's many places you can go. You can also make your own, as indeed Lauren Daniel has. Many people do that. It's a perfectly good route and very inexpensive compared to starting a television station. I can tell you that much. I may disagree with some things we heard earlier today in the panel and say that compared to other forms of media outreach you may do, radio can be very low risk, or generally is very low risk and very friendly, certainly at the ABC. Everyone's very happy to have you on. You can wear no shoes if you like. No one will ever find out if your little social media selfie sort of has the table there. You can even do shorts. I've done that. So helpful for those of you who may come from a more tropical climate. Writing for radio is a skill that I could talk about all day, but I know personally for me it's helped be concise, and also if you've ever had that experience where you write out something and then later, maybe it's a written publication, then you say it out loud and you think, none of this makes sense. What have I done here? This is not a good piece of copy I've created. Writing for radio, because you have to say it out loud and your mouth is forced physically to wrap around all the various vowels and consonants, it's a good way of really condensing your thoughts. It's very helpful, again, I've found. One last thing on audio is that, particularly the ABC, an organisation that is trusted by Australians more than many others, if you do a talkback spot, or you do a couple talkback spots, or you pitch and write an opinion piece when someone gets angry about vocal fry, whatever it is, that gives you a sort of profile and a sort of trust with audiences that is very real and can translate quite widely. Often I'm confronted at parties because of my ABC sheen. It's very awkward. Just rushing through this, and we'll get to questions. I know I'm running a bit over, but again, find me after this if you have any questions about working with media more specifically. But like one thing I will just stress here is that producers are the backbone and gateway and gatekeepers to basically any form of media, and they're one that are often quite neglected. You think, I've got this great publication coming out, and wouldn't it be great to go on the science show with Robin Williams, gets millions of downloads a year, he's this broadcasting legend. He has a producer, his name's David Fisher. Call the producer. The producer is always the person in charge, and that holds generally speaking for television. It holds generally speaking for online, the news producers as well. But particularly for radio, it's usually a producer who is the gatekeeper between you or your organisation and wider exposure. Really friendly hack I can disclose. If you want to email anyone at the ABC, first name dot last name at abc.net.au, or call someone up and ask. They will actually put you through, or they'll tell you who the appropriate person is. If you want to go on Away, or you want to go on Speaking Out, they will tell you. They are, provided you contact them in good faith, which I assume all of you will. I guess other things here have been sort of touched on. Think about regularity. You might have a local station, be it community or public. As Lauren said, there is a really great value in committing even to one 5-minute segment a month about general linguistics or about your own research. And that's something that content-hungry producers and hosts of shows really, really like. They love to be able to rely on people and be able to have people come in and say, you just don't have to worry about planning this 5 minutes once a month. So that's a really powerful idea that you can take with you, and something you can offer as well. You can say, I'm willing to show up in a radio studio for 5 minutes on every 4th Wednesday. I think that's it from me for now, so thanks.
Do a bit of casual furniture rearranging while I chat at you, just so that we can have a mic pointing at you, and I hope that there are some questions. So this part is meant to be really informal. If you have a question for a specific panel member about something they did, or if you have a question that you would like to kind of direct to the group in general, I'm going to go back to sitting down so this can be nice and casual, but if there are any questions, first one's always the hardest, but is the question everyone else is probably thinking as well.
I'm not sure about that, but I'd like to hear the story about the Prime Minister.
Look, this is a large part of my job is calling people, and I think as has been weirdly widely reported, I don't know why the Japan Times picked this story up. I don't know what good reason the Great Burgers of Tokyo would have to be interested in this, but no, people were saying in a variety of ways. I called to check. The guy in physically in Parliament sort of said, I'll put you through to her office, and normally in Australian context when that happens, that means you'll get put through to some sort of quite bland functionary who will sort of summarily fob you off and say, maybe in a few months. And then the phone picked up and it was sort of a couple of clicks and then, hello Jacinda, and I sort of thought, well, there can't be two. It's probably her, and she was pretty nice about it. The whole conversation lasted maybe about a minute. Usually I have 2 questions, which is, how's this name pronounced and are you aware of any variants? But the great thing about getting straight to the source is you don't have to ask the second question, a lot of the time anyway. So that was basically, she was really nice about it. And yeah, that's the whole story.
This is directed to the people who do a lot of social media. Do you think you need to be a voracious consumer of social media in order to be good at social media?
I'm not a voracious user of social media. And we have been successful with our Twitter. I think that our posts have been incredibly successful. To be honest, it wasn't a calculated move based on my huge experience with Twitter. As you can see, don't even know the right terms to use. So I don't think you do, but I think it would definitely be an advantage. And we have tried these posts across 3 different platforms, and it's worked only on one. And I think if you've got a greater knowledge of how things work, like you with Facebook, I think maybe that would, that's my opinion.
Yeah, I think, well, there's social media and then there's a specific platform on social media. It probably does really help to know the platform you're aiming for, and then to know that it's not going to work across all platforms. Like, what works on Facebook doesn't work on Twitter. Like, I see some pages automate Twitter and their Facebook thing, and so you look at Facebook and you can tell that things come from Twitter, and it's like, it's terrible Facebooking. So if you pick one platform and you know how that works well, just aim for that. That's probably a nice strategy.
Rosey?
I was just going to add that I think you probably need to, and again it depends on the platform, but you probably need to have a clear presence, as your, social media, outward-looking face, whatever it is. But that doesn't mean that you need to be constantly on it. So, if it's Twitter, if you sort of, have some particular profile that you want to distribute some particular sort of information, you can use various scheduling apps and things. So you can spend half an hour a week, sit down there, put in all the stuff that you want to tweet, articles, whatever, pithy comments, and just schedule it so that it's coming out regularly so that people can sort of see, there's someone there, there's stuff coming out. But you don't want it to be too robotic either. You've got to sort of hit the right note, but you can sort of manage your time with it, so you don't need to be switched on the whole time. And one of the things that I love about Twitter is you really can just dip in and out. When you've got the time, you can be really engaged. Those conversations will keep going when you don't have time or when you're not there, and you can just jump straight back in.
Sometimes it helps to have a team so that you can be omnipresent. I'm on the web an awful lot, and so what that does is it helps me to engage with readers and listeners, which is really nice. And also, then I can gank stuff from other people's pages, which is also really good.
The other thing is, this is a room full of linguists, and so don't be a voracious consumer, be an analytical consumer. A lot of these platforms have very specific interactional styles. Figure out as a linguist how those interactional styles work, and you're ahead of most people who are using those platforms.
How do you work out how you define success with your various social media outreach programs?
Should we just go down the line?
Okay, so let me just focus on Facebook for a second, because that's how we do it. You'll have pools of people. Pool 1 is people who've never heard of your show. Pool 2 are people who have heard, people who interact with you on media, people who actively suggest topics for you, and then people who donate to you on Patreon. Your goal is to move people from one pool to the next. And that's, so just put them in and then get them on the escalating commitment traveling. It really works.
For the Linguistics Roadshow, we actually don't have a particularly strong social media presence. It's sort of there. If we had sort of a bigger team, we could probably put more into it. So maybe I'll just talk about, I use Twitter personally and sort of have an academic profile, but I find that I get a lot of value out of Twitter from the sort of wider linguistics community. So really all I use Twitter for is to try and pay it forward. So I find that I really enjoy getting stuff out of conferences that I'm not able to attend when people are live tweeting it, when people tweet about jobs that are available or conferences that are happening or calls that are put out by journals. That sort of stuff is what I really like. So when I hear things from other sources, I try to put that stuff out on Twitter, and so my measure is just if I see people passing on that information and finding it useful to them and sharing with their networks, then I'm happy that, But I don't have any particular ulterior motive to get out of Twitter, anything out of Twitter.
I think though we have a Roadshow website, and I don't have Twitter or Instagram or Facebook or anything myself. I have an email address. But when I look at the Roadshow website and I see that we get a pretty solid 50 views a day from sort of individuals, and then they look around on a few pages, I think that's pretty good, because that's basically saying maybe a class visited the website and they looked at the maps, or they went to how can languages be different, and that's a pretty successful indication if you get a class a day visiting the website.
I have one good example actually that just came up recently, which shows that people are definitely using the website. So we tried, our website is kind of still being slowly developed, but the idea is for it to kind of be a sort of go-to source for various types of information about language stuff in Australia that might be of interest to teachers and students. And there was just the other week the exam for VC English language. It's a subject that's offered in Victoria, which is like high school level linguistics you do in the last 2 years of high school, and then you have a final exam. And there was material from our Linguistics Roadshow page as part of one of the exam questions of some of the stimulus. So that's great. That means that not only is it getting to students and teachers in the classroom, but the examiners are saying this is really useful for the students to respond to and discuss. And I was really pleased to see that. So yeah, I'm happy that I know someone who happened to be an examiner for this subject and showed me a screenshot of it. But that's really great. That means it's got obviously clear use for some people.
I'd say I measure our success on the kinds of engagements that people are having with us. So people who comment on the posts and say, wow, there are so many languages in Australia, I didn't know this. Or they say, hey, now I know the word for swan in my language, and I don't know why I didn't put this slide on. Or people who, we have a lot of people who comment with the word for dingo in their language or the language that they're working on. And that really speaks, so there's two different things. We're engaging an audience who is sharing their languages with the general population, which I think is really great. And then also a group of people who are saying, wow, I can learn more about my country and what is in this country, and that's really great. So yeah, it's those comments that are what I really love to see. Yeah.
I kind of just set my own measures, but I think one important point is that it's actually a success every time I post anything. That sounds silly, but I'm like, that page, Bilingual Education, it's kind of just been so fraught, and Aboriginal languages are still so undervalued in the Northern Territory. I just am happy that I put something on Facebook that says these languages are important, what's happening in this remote school is important, and whatever audience that finds is kind of bonus on top of that. So just posting stuff and having a go, like that's cool. But then I have my own little personal measures, like as long as I feel like the page is growing, however fast or slow, I'm happy with that. Like if it gets a reach beyond what the page likes are, that's my little thing that I go, yeah, that's cool. But yeah, just putting stuff up there is a success in itself.
I envy you deeply, Greg. I have 24,000 tweets and almost none of them have been successes, I think. So that's something to consider. Look, it sounds like a really waffly answer, but I think one thing that's critically important is you can really only succeed if you have aims that you want to get out of whatever social media thing it is you want to do. And that's, for me, the most important thing you have to consider. Like, are you an early career, someone who wants to make connections with more senior academics or see what's going on at conferences you can't afford to attend because you're eating ramen every night? Then maybe Twitter is for you, because that lets you, in a sense, as Rosey said, it lets you go to those places or be in on conversations you couldn't go. The thrill when, I had Joseph LoBianco follow me on Twitter a week ago.
You?
No, but after some totally different tweet about TISM. So, for me, that was amazing because it's a way to connect with people that I don't, read their stuff at uni. But I think if the aim is to sort of connect with people or get individual exposure, I think that something like Twitter is a good thing to go to, because even though it's not the biggest platform, it is the one that most, awful media people like myself are on trying to find content from. If you're an organisation, maybe it is a website. Maybe you want to have some kind of thing that'll show up if people Google search terms, because that's how everyone finds things nowadays, with contact numbers for you. Maybe it's a Facebook page, but if your aim is to, get user-generated content, but whether that's, novel words for things in languages that you aren't sure are out there, that might be a Facebook thing. It really all comes back to whatever your aims are and what you want to do. But privately, for individuals, I would really recommend, even though it is awful in some ways, Twitter is quite good for outreach, because it's where the journalists are and it's where they are all the time, and you can dig them out. So,
I think you kind of need multiple reasons to do this, and for the blog, I have kind of ideas of metrics, and for the podcast, we have ideas of each month how much we feel like we should be growing, or those kind of things. But then actually the things that keep me going are the The aim of the podcast is that I have a reason to talk to Gretchen every fortnight, and that is a pretty great reason to have a show. And you know, it's when we get tweets from people that are like, I was in my intro class and they were talking about constituency and I was already all over it. Like that is worth whatever metrics we were talking about before, is when you find those like individuals who really engage with linguistics in a way they may not have if that hadn't happened. So, yep.
My question is Lexi, with the photos, like choosing the images. I was trying to do something similar, but I found out that the most interesting pictures are usually like have copyright. So how do you deal with like rights?
I'm so glad you asked that, because I obviously spoke really fast and I always miss important points, and that's a really important point. Initially when I started this, I'm going to be open about it, I didn't think about copyright for a few months. I just kind of took images. And the emu one is one of them. But then, so Pixabay is great. Pixabay is a great thing for getting free copyright, like they're Creative Commons, but the lowest one, which means that you can change it as much as you want, and there's no copyright on those. Doesn't really help with photos of Australian animals and flora. So we have a couple of people who we've approached via their Flickr accounts. So I literally just looked in for people with really good Flickr streams and then wrote private messages to them and said, hi, this is what we do. You can find us here. I am running on a no budget at all. Can I use your photos? Totally happy if you say no, I'll give you credit on our website, which I do. And so a couple of people have said yes in that way, and so I've got access to photos that way. Yeah, and I regularly humbug the team as well for photos, and sometimes I get good ones that way. But yeah, it's a real issue with copyright. Be careful.
I think it applies to any media creation. Yeah.
I have a question for anyone that works on teaching people about languages other than English, which is how do you get people to engage when the language they know is English? And I'm thinking specifically of John McWhorter, who does the podcast Lexicon Valley in the US, and he explicitly says, I think in a few episodes, that he uses English examples because that's accessible for his US audience. And my question is, how do you get people to engage without relying entirely on English, and how do you get them to recognise the linguistic diversity? And I suppose the flip side of that is, how do you get people to recognise linguistic diversity without really exoticising those languages and those cultures as well?
That's a great question. I think maybe just one simple example is I mentioned that we have these sort of hands-on activities in the Linguistics Roadshow, so this is not something that would lend itself so well to a podcast or something like that, but students have language data in their hands from an Australian Indigenous language, which is basically represented as pictures. There are pictures on these cards with some sort of orthographic representation, and basically the puzzle is about working out which sort of semantic classes there are in these nouns that are just shown as pictures in some sort of orthographic form, and how do they match with these other orthographic forms on these other cards. So they get a little starter set, and then they basically are spread out on the floor, and then they're working with morphemes and putting them together, but they're not encountering any of these words. They know what the language is, they get a bit of background about the language, but they're the ones who are actually working out the linguistic structure, and then, as I sort of mentioned before, they feel extremely pleased with themselves that they've worked out something about how a language works, which is really different for most of them to how their first language works. And they haven't needed to encounter any particularly tricky linguistic terminology or anything along the way. So that was a really nice way to do one thing.
Yeah. And also students, still for just one more minute, who were learning German at school, then could sort of go, and sort of, you could see them like drawing these lines between, I learned this thing about German in this class, and I'm sort of lining it to what I know about English, and it's sort of shooting off, and so sort of having a practical example where it wasn't just, here's a snappy thing with one example, but they actually had to look through a fair bit of data to discover it themselves, that kind of helped, I think, and reduce the exoticism. It wasn't sort of like kooky here, it's like you learn it.
I do that a lot when I'm teaching at a university level as well, so when I'm teaching, for example, phonetics classes and we're talking about speech sounds in different languages, it's sort of easy to fall into the trap of going, wow, look, clicks, they're so crazy, how unusual. But, you know, a lot of the time there's, you know, maybe a student in the room who's from Africa and speaks a language that has them. So I just try to present everything as a totally normal, typical characteristic of some language in the world. And a lot of the time there's actually a student there in the class who's willing to sort of say, yeah, wow, they're in my language and here's an example. And that's a really nice way of bringing into the discussion, you know, different ways that languages work and without exoticizing them, because it's just, hey, look at all this stuff that's going on just even within the room that we're sitting in.
I'd be curious to, I'm happy to talk to you after, but like curious to know, like just sort of framing it in terms of what is the kind of objective, think of an audience, and then just think of a strategy that might be a bit novel or interesting. So, you know, things that I've blogged about before in terms of promoting multilingualism, which we did on Fully Sick a bit. Every federal election, I used to put together a post about candidates in the election who were bilingual or multilingual. And I used to do all this research, and I spent like a whole day finding out that Tanja Plibersek is Slovenian and so-and-so speaks this language. And just this long post about, hey, look how bilingual all our politicians are, and you would never know because they kind of hide it all. So, you know, that was just an indirect way to promote multilingualism in Australia. So just, yeah, come up with a cool strategy and give it a crack.
My key to not exoticizing other languages is to exoticize English.
Yeah.
To show how English is really weird. Hang on, this is the weird thing we do in English. Now let's take a look at how another language handles that. Wow, that actually makes a lot of sense. That's one of the things we do in science. We take normal things and make them weird. Why is the sky blue? Okay, well actually there's a really weird answer for that. Wow, you know, how do we learn the meanings of words? Well, that's actually a really weird thing that seems really normal until you look at it and then it gets weird. So science weirds normal stuff. And that's true for language too.
Who is going to ask the insightful, thoughtful, final question of the session?
No pressure.
I'll ask them. I don't know how insightful
Yes.
or thoughtful it is, but a question for the podcasters in particular. Daniel, you mentioned earlier that sometimes the general public are, I think you said interested in stupid and boring questions.
Interested in not the most interesting things about language.
Sure. So when you're, you know, an expert in this area, how do you identify the stuff that you think the general public is going to find interesting and still get, you know, that might be a bit out of the box from what they've seen before, or something different from what they've...
Do you mean like how do you get them
Well, coming
onto
up
the...
with your show ideas week after week, that's
Well,
going to engage me.
Sometimes it is stuff that I'm interested in, and I am interested in finding little things sometimes. It's just that I tend to keep an eye on, that's going to lead into a bad area. You know, like I know that if it gets into words that are overused or the untranslatable thing, it's like, oh no, not go there because that's just going to lead everybody onto a track, and then I'm going to have to spend the whole time explaining, well, actually, guys, there's another way of thinking about this. So it's hard to know just what we'll catch, but it's just, you kind of have to trust your instincts on it and say, okay, well, I think this might be kind of fun. I don't know if it helps.
No, that helps. I think you can get into the trap of like responding to the same stuff over and over again, the stuff you know people haven't responded.
So we try not to start on those premises, and we kind of like, just to talk a bit inside baseball-y for a moment, like we have a very active policy of not myth busting. So we never ever start with a premise that we then have to deconstruct. We'll start with a kind of flipped premise at the most, and so deliberately avoiding some of those cliched things. And so we haven't touched untranslatable words. We went straight into phonology, because phonology is actually a real form of like differences between languages that is actually quite hard to cross over. And so not even really touching the untranslatable words thing, finding another thing. And that is, we do this largely because we are academic linguists, and I think this is where academic researchers have a real advantage over people who are kind of general content creators, in that we know this field. And I love seeing who is going to be interviewed on Talk the Talk, because it's always like someone from the Linguistic network that Daniel knows, and it's really great in a way that other media outlets won't think to contact people like Greg necessarily on a particular topic, but as academic linguists, we have those networks. And so you actually have a lot of benefits as linguistics communicators that people like Kate, who does an amazing job on the Macquarie podcast anyway, don't have those kind of networks necessarily. So you should just hang out with us more. Right. I'm going to wind it up here just in case anyone wants to kind of approach members of the panel individually or ask those questions that you didn't want recorded for posterity. Before I do that, again, the slides are available. If there was anything someone said that you want to check up on, please visit the websites, visit people's Twitter, listen to their podcasts, like them on iTunes. That's how these things work. If you are thinking about doing a project, ALS is a great time to kind of hash it out with people. I'm sure I speak for all of us when I say we're just excited to hear that people have new great ideas, and if you're thinking about where to start, if you think of some ideas of things that ALS can do to support the way we engage with media or the general public, please let us know, because we can help build those support structures. And I'd like to thank you all for coming, and I'd like you all one more time to thank our lovely set of panelists.